Jayvardy.
Jayvardy.
This Jayvardy.
Jayvardy. Thank you, Jayvardy.
Jayvardy. Oh, Jayvardy. Oh my gosh.
Okay, today is the day for December 8th Vlogmas, the 8th Vlogmas. I've been putting this one off for a few days, but I'm going to do it. I am going to do a watch and review for SpiderMan 3, which is really a movie that's become like a meme darling the last like probably 4 or 5 years. This movie is the movie that produces the majority of the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man memes that is very prevalent on internet culture nowadays. But good memes doesn't mean a good movie, because remember that the movie was made in the context of being taken seriously. It wasn't a comedy movie that was made to produce internet memes, because internet memes weren't really a thing in 2007 when this movie came out. So it was the third movie in a trilogy that was meant to be taken seriously. So when you watch this movie, you're not watching it for memes, and you're not watching it to laugh. You're watching it to take the story seriously. And in that regard, Spider-Man 3, this movie I'm going to be watching today, is one of the worst movies ever made. Not just one of the worst Spider-Man movies ever made, one of the worst movies ever made, period. So I'm not really looking forward to doing this, to be honest. Like I said, I've been putting it off. When I did it for Spider-Man 1, that's a movie that, in my opinion, has more faults than good, but there are still really good elements of the movie. And they took the good elements of that movie and improved on them for the sequel, which the sequel, Spider-Man 2, is a fantastic movie, and one of my all-time favorite movies, actually. It's in my top 30 favorite movies. And quick plug for Vlogmas Day 5, I did a top 30 movie countdown, my top 30 favorite movie countdown. So go and watch that video. But this is one I've been putting off. I don't really want to watch this movie, but I figured since I did the first two, I might as well round off the trilogy. This movie is the longest of the 3 Spider-Mans, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to watch it in 20-minute intervals, pause the movie, and come back here and talk about it. So I'm going to pause this video, watch the first 20 minutes of this movie, and come back and talk about it. I'm going to try not to pause at every little stupid detail in this movie, because I feel like if I do that, I'm going to be pausing it probably every 30 to 90 seconds, like legitimately probably every 30 to 90 seconds. So I'm going to avoid doing that. Just know that I might not be as fully in depth with this one as the other two. We will see. And that's just mostly because I just don't have the energy to really talk about this movie for like an hour, to be completely honest. It's just not really worth the time. But I'm doing it. I'm sucking it up. I'm doing it. I'm going to go put it on, watch the first 20 minutes, and I will come back. The movie will be paused on the screen, so I'm going to adjust the camera so I don't have to after. Yeah, that'll work. Okay, I will be back after the first 20 minutes of Spider-Man 3. So if you want to follow along, go watch the first 20 minutes and then come back. Okay, so the first 20 minutes of Spider-Man 3 is done. I went a little bit over 20 minutes because the exact 20-minute mark was a little bit of an awkward pause. So sorry for the hiccup there. I don't know how that happened. But I ended up going until the end of Spider-Man, or Peter Parker, because he's not wearing the costume, and New Goblin's fight. So Harry just got knocked out. So yeah, this movie is like pretty much terrible already. The first 10 minutes of this movie should have all been cut. This is the longest Spider-Man movie in this trilogy anyways, but that whole first 10 minutes should have been cut from the movie. It literally established no new information whatsoever. Everything they showed, literally the opening credits was just callbacks to the first two movies and just like reminders of everything that happened. You know, just like recaps, if you will, of the first two movies. But the recaps didn't end with the opening credits. They continued for the first 10 minutes of this movie. Everything they show, everything they show is stuff we've already seen. Peter Parker sitting in one of Mary Jane's shows. We've already seen that in Spider-Man 2. That established nothing new. We already know MJ's performing on stage. Peter Parker in one of Dr. Connor's classes. We've already seen that. That's not establishing anything new. Harry and Peter talking, or Harry staring Peter down, and then them having a conversation outside the play, and basically Harry, like, we get showing that Harry wants to kill Peter. That's not anything new. Literally everything that they showed in the first 10 minutes was no new information. Everything was, you know, just recaps of things we've already seen. It really should have just been cut. The movie should have started with Peter Parker and Mary Jane laying on the web. That's where the movie should have started. Everything before that is irrelevant. Even Harry taking the performance enhancers is irrelevant, because at the end of Spider-Man 2, Harry is seen with all the Green Goblin equipment and picking up the performance enhancers. We didn't even need to see him take that. That could have been cut as well. So the movie should have started with Peter and Mary Jane laying on the web, because when that's happening, you have the asteroid or the comet or whatever it's supposed to be hit, you know, land right in the park they're at, which is pretty convenient that, you know, a comet or asteroid or space rock of some sort lands in the very park that Spider-Man happens to be at the time. That's very, very, very convenient. But at least it's something new. The dialogue of that scene was completely dreadful, but at least it was establishing something new. We got the Venom symbiote, which attached itself to Peter's scooter. Then we had the scene of Sandman being introduced. He's running from the cops. We see him in his apartment. That whole scene was completely dreadful with terrible dialogue, but at least it was establishing something new. That whole dialogue with him and his ex-wife or ex-girlfriend, whatever she's supposed to be, the mother of his child. Yeah, that dialogue was completely terrible. That's not how people talk to each other. Her dialogue was essentially her giving us information about him, which we did not need in that scene. We could have, they could have established all those things in a more creative way later on in the movie. We didn't, and they do reference those things later on in the movie anyways. We don't need to hear her say, "You're an escaped convict and the cops are looking for you." Like, what the hell was that? Like, seriously, what the hell was that? And her saying, "You maybe even killed a man," like, that's just not how people talk to each other. And assuming that she was his ex-wife, this is all shit that she, you know, should have yelled at him like months ago, years ago. Years ago, I guess, when he was like arrested. You know, there are things as like, you know, visiting people like behind when they're in jail. You know, that does happen. You know, she could have been on the phone on the other side of the glass wall screaming this at him then. There is such thing as bail, where as he's being tried, he's out on bail. She could have screamed all this at him then. How she was saying these things is not how people talk to each other, and it doesn't even make sense that she's confronting him now. If anything, all she really should have been saying to him was like, "You need to leave." Also, the sick daughter doesn't look sick whatsoever. She looks like a completely normal, healthy girl. So yeah, that was not done really well. Harry and Peter's fight was okay. Like, the most interesting thing about it is that Spider-Man isn't in his spider costume. But that doesn't really matter to this version of Peter Parker, because he's got organic webs. If this was Tom Holland or Andrew Garfield Spider-Man, he'd be fucked, because he'd have no web shooters. Assuming he wasn't wearing his web shooters, he would be completely fucked. Like, what would he do? He could, you know, try to run away, or like when Harry throws him against a wall, he could try to crawl away, but without his webs against the Goblin in an aerial battle, he'd be fucked. Like, even though Harry's just become the Goblin, he has been taking these performance enhancers for a while, I assume. And like I said, if this was Tom Holland or Andrew Garfield, and they didn't have their web shooters on, and why would they if they're just, in normal Peter Parker clothes without the spider costume underneath, they'd be fucked. And that would actually make the fight kind of interesting. But that can't happen with this version of Peter Parker because he's got those stupid organic webs. So he's technically Spider-Man 24/7. I know there's a lot more to his powers than just web, and that goes for the other Spider-Man too. But the other Spider-Men as well. That sounded weird because there is two of them, Spider-Man 2. No, but you get what I'm saying. The other Spider-Men as well have more powers than just the webbing, but in that type of fight where Spider-Man or Peter Parker would have been caught off guard, it's all up in it's in the air. It's an aerial battle. They're not on ground. They're not. It's not a close combat situation where like Peter has a lot of open space to jump around and throw punches and all that stuff. A lot of this fight was in tight areas and alleyways and being thrown through glass windows and shit. Basically without his web, Peter would have been fucked in that scene. The other thing that I hated about that scene is that Peter almost loses the ring that Aunt May gives him, and he doesn't. He ends up catching it, which basically makes the scene kind of pointless at the end of the day because this hero didn't suffer any consequences. If he won the fight, so first of all, Peter wins the fight, but he also didn't lose the ring. But if he did end up losing the ring, he wins the fight, but he still lost the ring. He's not going to be able to find it now. He lost it in the streets of New York. It's gone. And then at least that's a consequence that he has to deal with going through the movie, because the consequences that come through this movie are stupid as hell. So they had a chance to add some drama to the fight there, and they didn't do it because they just had him catch the ring, which was stupid. That was a really stupid creative decision. And that scene of Peter and Aunt May was really trash as well. Her whole story of Uncle Ben's proposal was really lame. She didn't really say anything inspiring. They're back to generic Aunt May dialogue from like the first movie where she's just talking about how much everyone loves each other and stupid nonsense like that. The only worthwhile thing in that whole scene is when Aunt May gives Peter her engagement ring, because that's her like doing something to help him out, and that was actually a touching moment. But the touching moment is lost with all that generic dialogue and the boring, lame story that she told about her and Uncle Ben when they were young. Oh, and also her saying that she said no when he first asked her to marry him is complete and utter bullshit and nonsense. That generation of women did not think like that. Remember, this is a movie that came out in 2007 with a lady that's probably 75 years old at this point. That generation of women when they were in their early 20s or late teens didn't say no because we weren't ready. That's nonsense. That's complete and utter nonsense. They're about 2 generations too early for that kind of shit. So that's just not even realistic, and it's also just, again, it's just stupid anyways. Like, we don't need, like, her saying that she said no doesn't really do anything for this story in any sort of way, so it's just stupid. The movie at this point, I'm 21 minutes in, and really the only thing new that's been established is we've been introduced to Sandman, we have the symbiote, and Peter has a ring to ask Mary Jane to marry him. They haven't really established a whole lot in this first 20 minutes. It's just been boring dialogue, generic dialogue, a fight that had no consequences for Peter Parker, and just recaps of the ending of Spider-Man 2, essentially, because the whole first 10 minutes should have just been cut from the movie. I literally don't understand why they didn't just start the movie with Peter and Mary Jane on the web. it makes no sense. There's no legitimate argument to have everything before that in the movie. This is the longest movie of the three. If they cut that first 10, it's like 9.5 minutes before they show up on the web. It's like 9.5 to 10 minutes before Peter and Mary Jane are on the web. They literally could have cut all that and it would still have been the longest Spider-Man movie in the Raimi trilogy. And it would have improved the beginning of this movie because it would have started establishing new information a whole lot faster. I hate this movie so much. It's so bad. Like I part of me just doesn't even want to finish watching it, but I can already tell this video is going to be just as long, if not longer, than the first two, and I didn't want it to be, but whatever. I'm going to go watch the next 20 minutes. Okay, so we're 40 minutes into Spider-Man 3, and this movie just is not getting better. I don't even know where to start with this next 20 minutes. Topher Grace's Eddie Brock has been introduced. His entrance in the Daily Bugle was stupid. His entrance on the streets during the crane accident was stupid. The whole crane accident thing is kind of stupid if you really think about it. Captain Stacy being like, get Edison on the phone. I don't know if that line's supposed to be taken seriously or if it's supposed to be a joke, but it's a really stupid, distracting line because, yeah, I've seen this movie a few times in my life, and I still don't know if that line is meant to be like the character is joking or if the character is serious. Like, I have no idea what the hell that's supposed to be. It just doesn't work. They should have. The line is kind of stupid, anyways. Like, I'm pretty sure that that they're already working on shutting down the power. I mean, the crane guy's screaming for them on his walkie to shut down the power. I don't think the police captain needs to reiterate that, but that's what a lot of this movie is. It's just dialogue being used to like explain what's going on, and that's a sign of a very weak writer when they're using dialogue to explain everything or to push everything forward. This is a movie. This is not the theater. This is not the stage. You're supposed to use visuals to push the story forward, not dialogue. Dialogue is only there to, dialogue is served to help visuals, and it's also there to give characters their own distinct voices through the story. When you use dialogue to explain what's going on with the story, that's a sign of a very, very weak screenwriter. And that this script in general is just, it's a terrible story. It's the characters are all going through very, very strange things that don't really line up with anything. They use dialogue to push the story forward. All these scenes are filled with really stupid things. It's just, whoever wrote this screenplay, it's reminding me of like Spider-Man 1, but even worse. Like, even worse. Because like, I'm struggling to find anything positive about this movie so far. Like, anything at all. The best thing was so far was when Sandman became Sandman, which was stupid. Like, how he got his powers was really stupid. And this is the thing, not every villain needs to have their origin explained. I don't understand why Flint Marko just couldn't have been Sandman from the start. I don't know why we needed to see how he got his powers, because how he got his powers was stupid. If it sounds like I'm being lazy with this review, I'm really not. I'm just trying to just tell you how it is. Like, that was really stupid how he got his powers. He should have died. Like, period. Like, he should have died. And I understand it's a comic book movie, but of all the... This is a good time to bring this up, because there's supposed to be 5 villains in Spider-Man No Way Home. There's Goblin from the first movie, Doc Ock from the second movie, Sandman from this movie, Lizard from TASM 1, and Electro from TASM 2. Sandman and Electro how they got their powers in their respective movies. Excuse me, I have the hiccups again. But how Electro and Sandman got their powers in their respective movies were stupid. It's not buyable, and like I said, I know it's a comic book movie, but it's not buyable how they got their powers. They both should have died from what happened to them, and it's just they're just both stupid. Is the easiest way to explain it, because they should have died. It's not believable that what happened to them would convert into what they become, and it's just stupid in general. I feel like both Electro and Sandman are too complex to try to explain in movie form how they got their powers, because not everything translates from comic book pages to the screen. Movies are a different medium altogether from comic books, and you have to have things be more grounded and more believable in movie form than they can be in a really cartoony comic book. And Sandman and Electro are fairly like cartoony villains. Um, so like if I was screenwriting a Spider-Man movie that had Sandman or Electro, I wouldn't even attempt to show how they got their powers. I would just have them be who they are, like right from the very first moment they're introduced. Why does the audience need to see how Sandman got his powers? Why can't he just start off being Sandman? You save yourself a headache. Same with Electro. Because the other three of those five, I don't really feel like that issue is there. Like, I don't really, I didn't question how Doctor Octopus became Doctor Octopus like at all. Um, Same with the Green Goblin, and even the Lizard in Spider-Man One is it's a pretty comic booky how they do it, but they do it the same way that the comic book does for Lizard, but at least they go out of their way to like explain the science behind it. They're literally um, crossing genetics of humans and animals for certain benefits. And for the Lizard, he's trying to use DNA and such of amphibians to regrow limbs, and then he ends up turning into a lizard. It's cartoony, but at least they explain how it happens. Whereas like Electro and Sandman, it's just like these weird accidents that result in them becoming these beings, but it's just not viable, and it's I just don't know why they even needed to do that. I'm gonna get back to Spider-Man 3 because that's what this review is supposed to be. But yeah, that last 20 minutes was stupid. Topher Grace is a complete miscast as Eddie Brock. Topher Grace's Eddie Brock is pretty much just like he's basically the Peter Parker with confidence. Like if Peter Parker is supposed to be, the quiet, nerdy guy in these movies, Eddie Brock is the like loud, confident, nerdy guy. But that's not who Eddie Brock is. Eddie Brock is, first of all, he's big, like big, big. Like he's supposed to be like, a football player. He's supposed to be, the misunderstood jock that tries to get with the hot nerdy girl Gwen Stacy, but he's so socially awkward that she doesn't like him, and he gets into a really Eddie Brock is actually a very, very dark character, where Topher Grace is like really bubbly and like making a lot of one-liners and talking to people with all sorts of confidence. Eddie Brock is a dark character. He's the he's the opposite of Peter in a different way of what this movie is doing. He's the opposite physically of Peter, most importantly, but also where Peter decides to. Eddie Brock is like Peter Parker when Peter Parker's first introduced, because Peter Parker has a lot of rage and uses his powers for like selfish reasons at first, and that they basically took that idea, made a football player body, and added extra rage to create Eddie Brock, because when Eddie Brock's introduced, it's like way into Spider-Man's existence. Like Venom wasn't even created until the 90s, and Peter Parker was created in the 60s. So at this point, like the character has had 30 years of development. but Peter Parker and Eddie Brock are complete opposites when they're introduced, because Peter Parker is the loner guy who's there to help the world, um, and to make the world a better place, where Eddie Brock is the loner guy who wants to fuck the world up. He starts having us kind of a turn into like an anti-hero, but Tom Hardy's movies are actually like, Tom Hardy physically looks more like Eddie Brock than Topher Grace does, without a doubt, but his movies aren't really accurate to what the Eddie Brock's character was intended to be either. But yeah, Topher Grace was a complete miscast. His character isn't even close to what Eddie Brock was supposed to be at all. And his Venom is barely in this movie, but in this 20-minute section, yeah, Topher Grace is annoying the hell out of me. The Mary Jane and Peter scene in the apartment was really, really stupid. Because Mary Jane is basically, like, again, she's using her dialogue to explain the story, because the story between them is that Peter's not a good boyfriend. So she's like literally using her dialogue to be like, don't give me the horse talk, understand how I feel. And it's like, okay. Like, it was weak dialogue. That whole scene was really stupid, because even when Peter was saying, like, it's a critic, you have to get used to this, he's not wrong. He's literally not wrong in what he's saying. Like, if she wants to be an actor, on Broadway in New York, like, that is something she's going to have to deal with literally her entire career, is that people are going to be writing articles criticizing her performance, and whether that criticism is good or bad, it's going to vary, and it doesn't matter how good of an actor you are going to be in shows where either the show is getting a negative review or you yourself are getting a negative review. So, like, what Peter's saying, it's not wrong. He might be saying it in a somewhat of a douchey way, but, like, not to the level that, like, she reacts at it. The whole Harry forgetting his losing his memory is really, really stupid as well. Yeah, like, he hit his head, but he's also been taking the performance enhancers, and he's supposed to be a super being at this point. So, like, a concussion shouldn't be causing him to lose his memory. And he does get it all back in this movie, but yeah, a concussion shouldn't be causing, that version of Harry Osborn to lose his memory. And the whole losing the memory thing, it's just stupid. Literally, the only reason it exists is so that they can go through the majority of the movie not having to worry about using Harry as a villain, because they can't have Harry being a villain the whole time, because they have too many other stupid plot points that they want to focus on in this movie. But yeah, there's really nothing good about this movie so far, except for when Sandman, and I think I started the thought but didn't end up finishing it, but when Sandman is reaching to grab the locket after he became Sandman, was actually a very visually powerful scene, and that's more due to Sam Raimi's directing rather than the screenwriter. The screenwriter put it in the screenplay, so I will give them credit for that. But that, to me, just is more Sam Raimi, creating a really nice, beautiful image, because you really feel like you really empathize with Sandman there, because it's like, this was a man who is not a man anymore. It's hard to tell what he is, but he's clearly not a man anymore. And it seems like he's using the sand around him to basically restructure himself into his old image, but he's not really it's like his old image is like fakery now, and he has to concentrate really hard to turn the sand into a hand so he can actually grab the locket and look at it. You empathize with him there, because it's like, imagine having this happen to your body, and it feels like through that scene he's really struggling to accept what's happened to him, but he adapts quickly, and he figures out how to use his powers relatively quickly, which is good, because you want to keep it moving. But that was the best part of the movie so far. literally everything else is just stupid. Like it's just a really stupid movie. I will say this: Bryce Dallas Howard as Gwen Stacy actually has more in common with Mary Jane's classic character than Kirsten Dunst Mary Jane does. And that's both in like how she's been used so far, and how they use her through the rest of the movie, which is kind of ironic because she's not playing Gwen Stacy at all. She's actually playing a character that's more in common with the traditional Mary Jane rather than the traditional Gwen Stacy. But whatever, it is what it is, I guess. Yeah. I'm trying to think of everything that happens, but like, there's just nothing really significant. There's just really nothing significant to talk about either, and that's the other thing about this movie. I'm 40 minutes into it now, and like, there's really nothing of major significance to talk about. There's only negative things to discuss. Nothing really cool has happened. Yeah, I can't believe this script got. I can't believe this script made it to camera, essentially, because you're 40 minutes into a 2-hour and 15-minute movie, and yet, like, there's, like, nothing here. There's, like, nothing here that's, like, worthy of making a movie. Like, I feel like the movie is still just getting started, but we're 40 minutes into it, so whatever. Next 20 minutes, I guess. Before I get to the next 20 minutes, I forgot about this, because like, this movie is so forgettable that I'm literally forgetting what I want to talk about each time I pause it so far. But we're at the part of like Peter and Harry looking at Norman Osborn's picture, and Harry's like, I wish I could remember more about him, which again, they're using dialogue to explain what's going on. But Peter says, he loved you. That's the most important thing. Which makes sense because, I mean, he's been hearing his Aunt May say that, like, over and over and over again through these 3 movies. But here's a challenge. Watch the Sam Raimi trilogy and take a shot every time a character says, he loved you, I loved you, they loved you, etc. You'll be dead, man. You'll be fucking dead with the amount of times that a character says either I loved you, he loved you, they loved you, we loved you, etc. Take a shot anytime a character says any kind of variation of that line, you'll be fucking dead. Yeah, the Sam Raimi trilogy is just fantastic though, right? Whatever. Okay, I couldn't even make it through the next 20 minutes. I had to pause that. This stupid scene of Spider-Man receiving the key of the city for saving Gwen Stacy's life or whatever. I don't even want to call that character Gwen Stacy because it's not Gwen Stacy. Okay. Spider-Man would never show up to this. There's no way in hell Spider-Man would ever show up to this. First of all, just because the city is advertising that they're going to do this, how are they getting in touch with Spider-Man to know he's going to actually show up? If they're just assuming he'd show up, that's really stupid, and this event would never happen. The city would not spend money to do this unless they actually confirmed that their guest was coming. So how did they confirm that Spider-Man was coming? And if they didn't and just assumed it, like I said, the real Spider-Man would never show up to this. Like, he would be like, yeah, that I'm not going to that. Spider-Man, especially like late on Spider-Man, and Peter at this stage of these movies has been Spider-Man for years now. He ain't showing up to something like this. It's just not something that he would do. This is very, very out of character for Spider-Man. Not to mention, Peter Parker was literally right above the entire crowd without his mask on. You're telling me not one person in that crowd happened to be looking in that direction and didn't see him without his mask on? So that's really stupid. Also, yeah, we saw Sandman run from the cops, and he went into that truck, and it was filled with sand, and the cop literally walks across the top of sand. Yeah, that's not how sand works. Um, there needs to be solid ground underneath sand to walk on top of it. If it's just literal sand, you will fall through it. So that cop shouldn't have been able to walk across the top of that truck. He should have, started sinking when he started walking in. That's kind of a big deal considering that, we're supposed to take Sandman and his abilities seriously. Maybe they should actually take the physics of sand seriously if they want us to take the characters seriously. And this scene is just so fucking ridiculously stupid that like I had to pause and basically say like, yeah, this just would never happen. Because first of all, the city wouldn't do an event like this without at least knowing that their guest would show up. And two, Spider-Man would never show up to this. Specifically for like basically what they're going for is this is all about Mary Jane. Once again, they're making this all about Mary Jane. She got fired from her job. She hasn't told Peter yet, so she's already hiding things from him. Clearly, why is Mary Jane with Peter Parker again? Because first of all, it's completely unrealistic in every single way. So like when things were going well for her, it's unrealistic to think that Mary Jane Watson, who's acting on fucking Broadway, would be with Peter Parker, who lives in a fucking bachelor apartment that doesn't even have a bathroom in it, who's still going through university. What's he studying in university again? Did they even ever say? I assume it's something to do with science, but what is his career goals? Oh yeah, he's also doesn't even have a staff job with the Daily Bugle yet, so he's a freelance photographer that gets paid shit money for his photos. He lives in a fucking apartment that doesn't even have a fucking bathroom in it. And he's in university studying God knows what, and has no real career ambitions that we know of. Yeah, a young woman who's successfully acting on Broadway would never be with a guy like that. I'm sorry to break it to people, especially young men. When they watch movies like this, they think this shit's realistic. It's not. A woman like that would never, ever, ever be interested in a guy like Peter Parker. The only thing he really has going for him is that he's Spider-Man. But through this movie, Mary Jane hates the fact that he's Spider-Man. So that's not even a good reason to be with him. Because she hates that he's Spider-Man. She doesn't like that he's Spider-Man. She's jealous of Spider-Man, actually, which doesn't really fully make sense. Again, it's kind of stupid. But here's the other thing. When her life starts going downhill, she doesn't even trust him enough to tell him about it. So, yeah, why is she with Peter Parker again? This movie is so fucking dumb. I can't believe they made this. And I can't believe that people still complain that they rebooted Spider-Man after this. Like, I mean, what else could they do? This wasn't salvageable at this point. The only reason Tobey Maguire is able to come back to Spider-Man now is because so much time has passed that it healed the wounds, and it's allowing them to play off nostalgia with him. That's the only reason he's able to come back, because this is a goddamn nightmare. The first movie also sucks if like you actually take off your goggles, your nostalgia goggles, and actually watch it. They made one good movie out of three, and this last one is so bad that it's like barely bearable. Yeah, I can't believe people actually complained that they rebooted Spider-Man after this fucking mess of a movie. What else could they do? They had no choice. If they were going to continue making Spider-Man movies, they had to change it up. Yeah, this is so bad. Like, I can't believe I'm actually sitting here doing this, taking the time to do this. Like, I didn't want to, and like now that I'm 40 minutes into this video and not even an hour through the movie, like I really don't want to finish it. Fuck my life. Okay, we are officially over an hour through Spider-Man 3. We saw the failed marriage proposal dinner of Peter and Mary Jane. We found out about the Spider-Man 3 retcon of Uncle Ben's death, which was just stupid in so many ways. It goes against everything that Spider-Man's origin stands for. It goes against everything the first movie's Spider-Man origin stands for. And it just doesn't make sense in terms of if Flint Marko and, the other guy, the carjacker, were teaming up to steal money for Flint's daughter, that was years ago at this point. She should be dead. So that they didn't think that out because that was over 5 years ago, and she already does. She looks like a completely normal, healthy girl in this movie. So if they were stealing money to help her 5 years ago, she should be dead. But then you could say, oh, well, maybe like they were just stealing money for the hell of it. But the whole point of Flint Marko's character in this movie is that he's not a bad guy. He's just doing what he has to do. So if he was stealing money for the sake of stealing money back then he is a bad guy. So either way, there's some really big inconsistency and big plot holes there. The other thing is that why would they show up to that event to steal the money without a getaway car planned in advance? Like, what is Flint Marko's role? He didn't go into the office. So what his role was to go jack a car the night of the robbery? That is really stupid, and they are two stupid-ass criminals if that was the case. In reality, he's the getaway driver and should have a car before this, so that doesn't make sense either. It's just, first of all, they should have never done this. It was completely unnecessary. They already have given Flint Marko's character a motivation, and they don't need to give Peter motivation to go after Sandman other than that Sandman is, robbing banks, and he's this giant sand monster that is dangerous. Like, that's it. You don't need to have this personal tie. They keep trying to make every single villain have some sort of personal tie to Peter Parker in these movies. They don't need to do that. Spider-Man is going to go after supervillains just for them breaking the law and, just being, just dangerous. Just like they're being dangerous. Like, we didn't need this. This whole retcon wasn't thought out. It was lazy. It goes against everything the Spider-Man origin stands for. The retcon doesn't even make sense in terms of the first movie, in terms of this movie, in terms of, them being competent robbers at all. Like, what are these guys, the fucking Home Alone robbers? Like, give me a fucking break. That's enough of that. They should have never done it. The retcon was stupid. Really, really stupid thing. One of the reasons why I hate this movie so much as a Spider-Man fan, actually. The dinner with Mary Jane was not fantastic. The play of Peter and the host, trying to get the ring to the table and Peter being like, no, like, that was actually relatively amusing. Like, Tobey Maguire actually, it was amusing watching him like turn, like, say like no, like, each time. That was actually not bad. Gwen Stacy again, actually, Bryce Dallas Howard is like actually playing Mary Jane Watson, or like her character is closer to the Mary Jane of the comics than it is to the Gwen Stacy of the comics, which is like just super freaking ironic. But the thing is, the drama between Peter and Mary Jane at this point of the movie, there hasn't really been enough to cause this level of resentment that Mary Jane has for Peter, other than like what I already mentioned before, and that's that she just, like, she doesn't really like this guy, and maybe like she's coming to realize that she's with a guy that she doesn't really like, and she gave up like a marriage to like a successful astronaut man that, like, assuming he was going to space again, she'd have tons of freedom anyways, like he wouldn't be around all the time. But she's a Broadway star, he's an astronaut, whereas like Peter Parker still doesn't have his shit together, and maybe she's just realizing like she doesn't really like Peter, and that's kind of like why she's acting the way she is. Like, that's literally the only thing I can think of, because there isn't really any other reason for Mary Jane to be acting the way she is through this movie. And yeah, the kiss with the Gwen Stacy kiss thing, like Mary Jane does have a legitimate point there. Like he legitimately ruined their moment by doing that, which is also that's for that dinner scene, it makes sense, but on the whole, that was very out of character because, like I said, Spider-Man wouldn't even have shown up to that event. And Peter has always been an intelligent guy who's kind of stupid. And what I mean is like he's very, very academically educated and intelligent in that regards, but Peter Parker kind of makes dumb decisions sometimes. But I don't know if Peter Parker's that dumb. That kiss was stretching it because like he knew Mary Jane was there. He knew that she like he's not completely oblivious. Like that's the thing they're trying to make it out that he's like completely oblivious, but like come on, Peter's not that dumb to do that. But the other thing on top of that is that while she has a point about that, which it's like shouldn't even exist anyways because I think that shouldn't have been in the movie, but she did the same thing in Spider-Man 2. Like, she literally recreated the kiss in Spider-Man 2 with her fiance. So, she already ruined the moment for herself already. So, like, why is she getting mad at him? At least when he kissed Gwen, like, it was literally just part of a show that Spider-Man was putting on for an audience. Whereas, like, when she kissed her fiance, like, she was trying to recreate a moment that, meant something to her. Whereas like Peter didn't do that. Like he was just trying to put on like a facade as Spider-Man. So she's already ruined that moment for herself, anyways. But yeah, again, Peter Parker just got the black suit. So there's a big, massive continuity error that's bugged me from the very first time I saw this movie. And that's when Peter's laying on the bed and he's having the nightmare and the Venom symbiote covers him. He's wearing his Spider-Man suit, but he's not wearing the mask. However, when we cut to him when the symbiote's taken over him, it's the mask part is shaped completely consistent with the rest of the costume. It's like his red Spider-Man mask, but now part of the black suit. And, you could say, oh, well, the symbiote adjusted to the rest of the costume, so it formed the mask. But Peter Parker literally takes it off like he does his other masks. So that's just a really, 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 really massive continuity error that generally continuity errors happen because, mistakes happen. No movie is perfect. And or they decided to splice takes that don't perfectly cut together, but they chose them for performance sake. A good example of that is in The Dark Knight when Batman has the Joker up against the wall when he's interrogating him. Heath Ledger's hands go from like underneath Batman's arms to like on top of them, and that's because they're splicing different takes together that they liked for performance. And Heath Ledger was just trying different things throughout the performances, but it caused a continuity error. That's different from this. This was a story continuity error of he didn't have the mask on, but then when they cut to him, he does have the mask on, and he takes it off like a mask. That's a continuity error that they don't have an excuse on. Either he should have been wearing the mask in bed when the symbiote took over the suit, so it was like 100% suit, or the Venom mask should not have been the Spider-Man mask. It should have been more closer to like Venom's head over top of the spider costume. And then like how like Venom like the symbiote like retracts when Eddie wants to show his face. It should have been like that for Spider-Man with the rest of the costume, like that, or he should have had the mask on in bed. Whichever one they should have done one of those to avoid this massive, massive continuity error that's unforgivable. There's no reason this continuity error should have happened. I will say this though, we're at the point in the movie where the memes are coming on, and I'm sitting there fucking grateful as hell that the memes are coming on because at this point, this movie is so bad that, like, yeah, the memes are helping it. And that's only because of the internet. Remember, when this movie came out, it was completely fucking panned. And it deserved to be. This is a terrible movie. I don't even really need to finish this review. It's just a terrible movie. And nothing they do throughout the rest changes that. but the memes are starting to happen. They're going to start coming pretty rapid pace too. We've already had a few of them. And the Bully Maguire, Toby Maguire memes are going to make the rest of this watch a little bit more bearable, not gonna lie. But yeah, I'm pretty comfortable in saying Spider-Man 3 is the worst Spider-Man movie ever made. You know, when you haven't watched movies in quite a while, and I haven't watched Spider-Man 3 in a few years. The only one I go out of my way to watch is Spider-Man 2. So having not watched Spider-Man 3 in probably, I would say, 2 to 3 years, sometimes when I rank the list in my head, it's like, I'll rank Spider-Man 3 and TASM 2 relatively close to one another, but TASM 2 is a bad movie. This is a terrible movie. There's a difference between a bad movie and a terrible movie. This is a terrible movie that, like, isn't worth watching ever, whereas TASM 2 it has its problems, but it's still a lot better than this. I know there are people out there that swear on their life TASM 2 is the worst Spider-Man movie of all time. That's not. This is the worst Spider-Man movie of all time, and it's not close. This is a terrible movie. The only thing, like, redeeming about it is the memes, and that's not the movie's doing, that's just the internet's doing. And taking that into consideration, this is just a terrible, terrible, terrible movie. But the memes are coming on, and thank God for that, because they're gonna make the rest of this watch a little bit more bearable. I am not going to keep pausing unless there's something I really want to talk about, and that's how I'm going to treat the second half of this, because at this rate, this is going to be a 2-hour video. So from this point on, I'm only going to pause the movie if there's something significant that I want to talk about, and I'm going to try to keep that to a minimum. Because I don't even want this going another 20 minutes realistically. So that being said, I'm going back to the movie. Okay, so we just saw Spider-Man in the black suit fight Sandman. We got the most famous Spider-Man meme of all time. You'll get your rent when you fix this damn door. And we had a scene of Peter telling Aunt May that Spider-Man killed Sandman, or Flint Marco. Sorry about that. Flint Marco. I always want to say Marco Flint, but it's Flint Marco. He said that Marco was killed by Spider-Man, and she is like, Spider-Man doesn't kill people, and she says that, it's not up to them to judge whether someone lives or die. And that scene kind of, again, I talked about this in the Spider-Man 2, it was like another little wink and nod scene, but in a more emotional context this time, of like, Aunt May probably knows Peter is Spider-Man. She doesn't come out and ever say it. They do the same thing with Sally Field in The Amazing Spider-Man and The Amazing Spider-Man 2, where Aunt May pretty much knows Peter is Spider-Man but never fully says it. They do it a little bit more obvious in the TASM movies than they do in these ones, but even in Spider-Man 2 and Spider-Man 3, Aunt May knows Peter is Spider-Man. That's pretty evident to me after watching them these times around. And I have to say, that whole sequence was good. The meme is hilarious, but it's still in character with what's happening to Peter. Like, he's losing himself. The black suit fight against Sandman was entertaining, even though there was a lot of really nitpicky inconsistencies with it. We've already seen when Spider-Man punches Sandman that he's not able to land a punch. His punches go through the sand. Yet when Black Suit Spider-Man is able to do so, when Black Suit Spider-Man physically contacts Sandman, that doesn't happen, which doesn't make any sense, because Spider-Man's had a strength upgrade, but also Sandman is getting more and more used to his powers at this point. So it doesn't make sense that Black Suit Spider-Man is able to land punches and kicks. So that's a major, major, major inconsistency in the movie. They even when they shove his head against the train, right after like Spider-Man lands punches and kicks, you see that the sand is disintegrating. So again, like that part makes sense with everything that's been established. It's the punches and kicks before that doesn't make sense with everything they established. And then when his head goes against the train and it starts grating away the sand, it just like they emphasize in the very same scene that it doesn't make sense that Spider-Man is able to land physical contact. So that was a problem with that fight. But overall, the fight was pretty good. When Spider-Man breaks the tank of water, which I'm not like overly familiar with New York City subways, but why is there like a big, massive just tank of water in a subway? That like I don't really understand that. I assume it's sewage water, but yeah, that one didn't really make much sense to me. That's just like that's just plot fodder and not really well thought out. But that's a theme with the Raimi trilogy scripts, is they're just not really well thought out. When Spider-Man douses him in the water and Sandman like is engulfed in all the water, Spider-Man swings and does a kick. That camera cut has always really bothered me because it's completely unnecessary for Spider-Man to do that kick. Sandman's literally disintegrating, so why would Spider-Man need to get in one last kick? It doesn't make any sense. And it just looks stupid and confusing too, because Sandman's engulfed in water and underneath water, so how would Spider-Man even do that? Why was there no massive like splash when Spider-Man did that? So that was kind of dumb, but overall that little block was probably the best part of the movie. I would say that little block is one of the few positive parts of the movie. Same with Sandman when he first becomes Sandman, reaching for the locket, which is always a really empathetic moment. So I didn't want this review to be completely negative 100% of the time. I do think the movie deserves it, but that part I enjoyed. There were some nitpicky issues, and again, the dialogue of Aunt May was a little bit generic, but it served its purpose, and these parts were decent. Right now, Mary Jane is about to go apply for like a waitressing job, which the movie did not need to go in this direction with Mary Jane. It didn't need to happen. There was enough things that they could have there was enough avenues for them to go down of conflict. Movies are based off of conflict. You need conflict between characters. You need conflicts for characters to overcome. That's the whole purpose of the movie art form. But they didn't really need to go in the direction they went with Mary Jane in this movie. They didn't need to at all. There was, like I said, there was enough like different avenues for them to go down that they could have gone down instead. Not just with Mary Jane's character, but for the conflicts of the movie as a whole. The thing about Kirsten Dunst in this movie, and I don't fully blame her for this, so don't like think that this is me calling out Kirsten Dunst specifically, but she's phoning it in, man. It's very obvious. Like every scene she's been in so far, you can tell she's phoning it in. She doesn't give a shit anymore. And that's another reason why they needed to reboot Spider-Man, is like the supporting cast stopped caring, and I don't blame them. I think James Franco's phoning it in for the most part in this movie too. But Kirsten Dunst really was like, it's quite clear to me. Like I don't know Kirsten Dunst, so I can't confirm this myself. And I haven't heard anything specifically about this. Like, she's never really said anything specific, but watching her in this movie, I can only assume that she read the script, she knew it sucked, she knew the movie was going to suck, she saw that her character was completely, like, butchered and, like, just written really stupidly once again, and that she was basically just being used as plot fodder once again. And I get the feeling that she probably, when she read this script, she probably, shrugged her shoulders and was like, I'm going to get paid, so I'm going to show up, I'm going to, read my lines, and I'm going to go home, and I'm going to enjoy my paycheck. Like, what else can she really do with the fucking crap that they hand her in this movie? Like, she So, like I said, I can't fully blame her for showing up to phone it in. And she's definitely phoning it in this movie. It's quite clear she does not give a fuck anymore. And I can't fully blame her for that. I mean, if I was handed this script and I read through it and I looked at the character that they were asking me to play, which would be Mary Jane, I would have been like, I would have had the same mindset. I would have been like, you know what? I don't care anymore. They're going to pay me a decent sized paycheck. So I'll show up, I'll read my lines, and then I'll go home. But when your series gets to that point, when principal casts start phoning it in like that, and the movies just aren't turning out anymore, what do? You reboot. Because what else can you do? There should be nobody that watches this movie and debating about whether or not Sony should have rebooted Spider-Man. The answer is a resounding yes. Yes, they should have. They made the right call rebooting it. The second time around, I think they made the wrong call rebooting it. I think they rushed into that decision rather than, that's another topic for another video, but yes, they should have rebooted. But that little part of Spider-Man 3 I enjoyed. This next part is gonna, it's just stupid, like the majority of this movie. Okay, so we just got to the part where Peter and Mary Jane broke up in the park. Before that, Mary Jane went to go see Harry. Harry and Mary Jane had a really, dumb scene that, was just kind of a waste of time more than anything else, because I guess the idea was that Mary Jane was cheating on Peter. So also that she's just a very weak person. Like she needs people to she can't deal with her issues on her own is what it seems. Like she always needs somebody to have somebody's shoulder to lean on while she's crying per se. And so she runs off to Harry. They end up having a moment, and that moment happens after they're cooking and listening to music in the kitchen, which is just so fucking cliche and so stupid that I don't know, again, why did this movie get greenlit? Why didn't they just tear this awful script up and start from scratch? Even if it delayed the movie a year, they should have just started from complete scratch, because this was just terrible. But then Harry gets his memories back, which was just stupid in itself. He should have never had his memories lost in the first place, but then he gets them back randomly, and Norman is talking to him again, and Harry's like, yes, father, I'll do what you want me to do. It's just so, he literally says, yes, father. It's so fucking stupid that it's unbelievable. And Harry, James Franco, and Kirsten Dunst, they're phoning it in, and that scene on the bridge where I guess because Harry kidnaps Mary Jane as Goblin and is putting her up to do this, but literally everything Mary Jane says on the bridge when she's fake breaking up with him is stuff that she has been feeling through the movie anyways. So I remember when I was younger, and when I first saw this movie, I was 16 because it came out in 2007, and my birthday's I'm born in 1990, but I'm born in December, so I was 16 turning 17, and at the time, I didn't understand that she was fake breaking up with him, because literally everything she's saying is stuff that she's been feeling through the movie, and they're all legitimate reasons why she would want to break up with him. So if I'm Kirsten Dunst, I was talking about before, what's she supposed to do here? Because I imagine she probably felt the same way when she read it. She probably was like, so am I really breaking up with him, or am I fake breaking up with him? Because these are all things my character is actually feeling and going through, and they're legitimate reasons why she'd want to break up with him, but is she really breaking up with him, or is the Goblin putting her up to it? And then Sam Raimi and the fucking writers are probably like, oh, the Goblin's putting her up to it, and she's probably like, okay, whatever. What else is she gonna do? It's her character just doesn't make sense once again. And it's she probably would realistically be breaking up with Peter anyways, but now she's fake breaking up with him. Like, it's just so dumb. Like, I imagine Kirsten Dunst was like, that's probably what her exact reaction was like, okay, sure, guys, like, whatever, just tell me what to wear and I'll go on camera and I'll do it. Like, I mean, what else is she gonna fucking do at this point? Because I don't think they would have, like, she didn't have enough pull on these movies to, get, like, rewrites. Tobey Maguire didn't have enough pull on those movies to get rewrites at the end of the day. If he did, they would have never rebooted Spider-Man in the first place. Um, which is just a common theme with these all like the Sony produced Spider-Man movies. Is just that like nobody really had any say outside of the studio and possibly the directors. And I say possibly the directors because I don't think Sam Raimi really wanted to make this movie, but he was one of the screenwriters on it, so he doesn't really get any sympathy from me because he wrote this fucking mess of a fucking movie. So it's his own fault, really. And Mark Webb, same with Chasm too. He wasn't one of the writers on that, but the point is nobody had enough say in these movies to like help the productions be more smooth. And I just imagine Kirsten Dunst like reading that fucking scene in the park and not knowing really what to do with it, so she just fucking went on camera and phoned it in. And of all the scenes that are evidence of her phoning it in, that one is like the biggest evidence of her phoning it in because like it's just she was so awful in that scene, and so was Tobey Maguire. I mean, Tobey Maguire, his Peter Parker comes across as very, very fucking pathetic in that scene. And also just Tobey Maguire comes across as a terrible fucking actor in that scene as well. Tobey Maguire is a pretty divisive guy. Like his fan base are like really hardcore, think he's fucking top shit. And they can't handle any sort of criticism towards him whatsoever, but he's not actually that great of an actor. Like, I think when he's at his best, he's like passable. Maybe when he's at his very best, he's good, but he certainly isn't anything beyond good. And that scene was just dreadful. And the movie is losing me once again. They did like 10 minutes of like okay shit, and now they're back to like just terrible. And coming up next is that stupid fucking cafe scene with Harry and Peter, and then they're gonna fight it out. Which at least we're gonna get that awesome meme of look at little Goblin Jr. Gonna cry. Like I'm excited to watch that. I'm not really excited to watch the rest of this movie. Okay, so I just paused at the end of the jazz scene where Peter Parker takes Gwen Stacy out to dinner or whatever to basically make Mary Jane jealous. Before that, you had the montage of like Peter with the black suit. You had the fight with him and Harry. You had like meme after meme after meme of look at Goblin Jr. gonna cry, which was a fantastic one. You had Dr. Connors calling Peter and Peter being like, "Oh, Dr. Connors," and like pretending to fall asleep. Like that was fucking hilarious. That still to this day makes me laugh. So fantastic job, Tobey Maguire. But the rest of all those like montage scenes where he's trying to be like overly cocky, confident, and super cool guy. Tobey Maguire is such a geek and such a dork that he can't really pull it off, to be completely honest. It's a little bit unbelievable that he's I'm having major deja vu right now. Yeah, major deja vu, but it's not really viable that he's I don't think Tobey Maguire he's too dorky to pull off what I think they wanted to do with him in those moments. It works because of like the meme culture, and it's like kind of entertaining and amusing to watch, but it's not realistic enough to buy because like Tobey Maguire just doesn't have the acting chops to pull off the like they're trying to show that there's like a complete difference between who he is normally as Peter Parker versus what he's become under this. and he's really turned into an asshole. One thing I have to say about this scene, this jazz club scene, which is kind of stupid overall because like I said, I don't really agree with what they've done with the Mary Jane character. They just did not need to go down this road whatsoever. But there's a couple things that point out that I want to point out that are really stupid. First of all, Mary Jane's job is ridiculous. A singing waitress. What is this? The fucking 1950s? Yeah, that wouldn't be a thing. If she was working in like a jazz club like that, it's one or the other. In the modern world, it's one or the other. Like that, the whole like singing waitress, like the waitresses are like performers. That's like so like retro America, but like in real life, even in this era of like 2007, 2008, like whatever, just before the 2010s, it's one or the other. You're either in there as part of the entertainment or you're a waitress. You're not both. They don't have like the singer. The singer in the band wouldn't have time to be waiting tables because she needs to be up there singing songs. And a waitress in a place like that also doesn't have time to be singing songs because she has customers to be serving. So it's just her job is stupid. It's something that only would exist in a movie and not in real life. So that's stupid. But the musicians, why are they still playing music when Tobey Maguire interrupts the performance? And once Toby starts dancing across the bar and stuff, like he would have been kicked out then, let alone at the end of the scene. There's just no way those musicians would have kept playing music, and there's no way that like security and like all that would allow that to happen. That's such a like stupid movie moment that when you dissect it, you realize how stupid and nonsensical it really is. And when a movie is great, you overlook things like that. But this isn't a great movie, so you don't overlook things like that. If you want to make a really unbelievable scene like that, you better make sure the rest of your movie's fucking spectacular, so that way nobody's nitpicking it. I will say that at the end of the scene, though, they do two things really, really well. Number one, imagine being Peter Parker the geek who's filled with all this rage right now. Like Mary Jane's like, "What's wrong with you?" And he's like, you're what's wrong with me. Like you ruined my life. Like fuck you. I'm in love with you, and like you basically cheated on me with my best friend. Like who the fuck are you? And you have this guy like wanting to kick him out, and you have this security guy like. You have this like fat rich guy basically like telling you off, and this big fucking muscular like guy that's like wanting to kick your ass if you don't immediately leave this situation. It's like in real life, in Peter's old life, he'd be completely powerless. But he's fucking Spider-Man. He is not powerless. He's the one with the power. And every raging nerd can watch this moment and completely understand of like, I wish there were times in my life when the big fucking jockey muscular guy put his hands on my arm to drag me out, that I wish I could have grabbed him and threw him against a wall and beat the living hell out of all the other security guards like Spider-Man does in this scene, which is like really, it's supposed to be dark and twisted, but it's kind of heroic in its own way. But then when Mary Jane intervenes, he whacks her, and that's the heaviest drama moment in this entire movie. And again, Sam Raimi did it well, that even though as ridiculous as everything that preceded this scene was in terms of all that montage stuff and how ridiculous this movie as a whole has been, that moment when Peter hits Mary Jane, it hits hard, and it's a really effective dramatic moment, and Peter realizes like, oh my god, like who have I become? I hate that like he looks down at his collar to see the black suit, so it's like a reminder that, these movies, these Spider-Man movies that Sam Raimi made has so many stupid like little reminders to like direct the audience. Like Sam Raimi doesn't know the word subtle. He has no idea what the concept of subtleness is in his directing. Everything is super on the nose. and it comes across as amateurish. I think there are things in this trilogy that come across as really amateurish, and that's both both in the screenplay but also in the directing. And that moment, it's like, why couldn't we just sit in the moment with Peter's face? Like, Peter's face says it all. He realized, like, oh my God, what did I just do? Why did we have to insert that little corny moment of him looking down and seeing the black suit? I hate that for two reasons. One, it's really on the nose. Like, you don't think your audience is smart enough to realize that the suit is the one doing this to him. And two, it immediately, in the scene itself, not even the next scene, but in the scene itself, it basically excuses Peter's actions. It's like, oh, you just did this really fucking dramatic assholey thing. Don't worry, you're off the hook in the very same scene in the eyes of the audience. And that's really poor directing. We should have sat in that moment with Peter and be like, holy fuck, like, what the fuck did you just do, man? Like, what did you just do? And then you can deal with the whole black suit thing in the next scene. Like, we didn't need that built-in excuse for him right in that scene with that corny look down. That being said, imagine if the entire movie was like built around ideas like this, where Peter has this black suit and it's changing him, and all the conflicts are coming from how he is, interacting with everybody. He's hitting Mary Jane. He ruined his relationship with Mary Jane, and he ends up whacking her. Remember, he hasn't really had the black suit on all that much at this point in the movie. He doesn't actually wear the black suit all that much, but imagine if he ruined his relationship with Mary Jane, including physically hitting her, and she legitimately has broken up with him, not that stupid fake breakup that the Goblin had. He kills his best friend, or almost kills his best friend. He kills Uncle Ben's murderer, and Aunt May, who knows he's Spider-Man, loses her faith in him as a human being. Imagine if this was what the whole movie was built around, these ideas. This movie would have been good. Unfortunately, that's not what they did. They went down a whole bunch of nonsensical avenues. The script is all over the place. It's not well thought out. And I know Venom was a thing that they didn't want to do, but that's what they were instructed to do. And if they actually did some decent things here, but imagine if they built the whole movie around that concept of Peter has this suit. And his actions while wearing it is literally ruining the lives of himself, because he's ruining the lives of everyone else around him. That would have actually made this movie probably good. I say probably because, like, I've seen the movie as it is now, and I've seen the first Spider-Man movie, but there was definitely potential for them to do something there. But yeah. The last thing I want to say, right now, Spider-Man's about to go, try to tear this suit off at the church. I'm going to watch the movie from the rest point out, but I have a theory. I want to throw in a theory quickly, because Spider-Man No Way Home has the 5 villains that we already talked about. And apparently in Spider-Man No Way Home, all these villains died at the hands of Spider-Man. My theory is that, because the problem is that Lizard and Sandman don't die. Sandman doesn't die in this movie, and Lizard doesn't die in the next one, The Amazing Spider-Man. I have a theory that, what about this? Because apparently when they get sent back, they're going to try, maybe Peter, like Tom Holland's Peter, is going to try to send them back to a point where they don't end up dying. So here's my theory. What if Sandman in Spider-Man No Way Home was killed by Spider-Man in the subway when Spider-Man doused him with the water? And, what if Sandman died there, and then that's when he's transported to the MCU, is like right after that moment. And when he's transported back, it's when Sandman comes back to life at the edge of the sewer, because that's happened now too, where we see Sandman come out of the sewer and he's alive. What if that's the moment that he's transported back from the MCU to this movie? And yeah, he still fights Spider-Man at the ending scene, but he also is redeemed. So what if, like, Sandman in No Way Home is right after that tunnel scene, and then when he's transported back at the end of the movie, that's the point where he's transported back to, when he comes back to life, and when he sees Penny and he realizes he's back in his own time in his own universe, that's when, like, you know, the rest of the story happens for him, where, you know, he's thinking about. It would also make sense as to why he would go back after Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man, because like, Spider-Man did try to kill him in this universe. Um, but it would also make sense as to why he changes his mind after and is like, you know what, you in the other universe, the MCU, saved my life, and you here, you're not actually that bad of a guy, so I'm going to make up with you and I'm going to leave. That would make sense to me. And I hope that's what they do. I really hope that's what they do. I hope it's not that Spider-Man and Sandman continued fighting after this movie and Spider-Man killed him then. I would really hate if that's the case. That's probably what they're going to end up doing with Lizard. But with Sandman, I hope that, like what I just said, that theory is what they do. It came up to me as I was watching that part of the movie. There's about 35 minutes left. I'm just gonna watch it out, and I mean, there's really nothing that happens in, like, the finale of this movie that, you know, hasn't been picked apart 100 times already on the internet, and there's nothing really, like, crazily spectacular or crazily bad about the rest of the movie that I can remember. So I'm just gonna watch the rest of it out, and I'm gonna come back and try to do final thoughts in 9 minutes. Okay, so I finished Spider-Man 3, and, you know, nothing, like I said before, nothing spectacular really happens in the ending. I mean, the final battle of Spider-Man and Goblin teaming up to take on Sandman and Venom has its moments, but overall, the battle is actually, it's not as entertaining of a fight as the Spider-Man Dr. Octopus fight on the train in Spider-Man 2, even though you have 4 characters to work with. So there's that. It wasn't really an entertaining fight. I don't think there was anything overly exciting about it. The beats of the fight was really messed up because you kept cutting to, you know, an applauding crowd at the bottom. You kept cutting back and forth to, like, a newscast that's just really stupid. That should have never been in the movie. And you have, you know, J. Jonah Jameson on the ground for comedy. It's just, the beats of it are really messed up. When they focus on Peter and Harry teaming up and, like, the banter between the two of them, it really works. But it's really the only thing that works about that fight. Not to mention that Mary Jane is kidnapped for the 3rd time in 3 movies. They really should have tried to come up with something more creative to get Spider-Man at that final place. Not to mention, you know, the fucking New York City crowd that's just gathered at the bottom watching all this. How come Venom and Sandman didn't just start, like, grabbing hostage after hostage after hostage? Like, they could have done that and not even have had Mary Jane get kidnapped. But, like, you know, they had to have Mary Jane involved in some way. There's some really awkward editing and cuts in there as well. First of all, when the car is on its side and Mary Jane's still in the car, she takes both her hands to grab a brick to drop it on Venom's head. There's a thing called gravity. How the hell is she still in that car? The only way she would still be in the car is if she's holding onto the steering wheel with both or at least one hand. She takes her hands to grab a brick, she's falling off the edge of that car. I'm sorry. That's, again, the little things like that can be overlooked in a great movie, but this isn't a great movie. Also, I'm not big on how Harry ends up getting to the fight. The whole, like, his butler, like, being like, yeah, your dad killed himself, is just stupid. Like, they didn't need to do that. They could have easily just had Harry and Peter have the talk, which was really dramatic and really good, actually, of, like, Peter asking Harry for help, Harry being like, you're a piece of shit, you don't deserve my help. And then, like, that was dramatic and good. Why couldn't Harry just have made up his own mind after that, you know what, I actually am going to help Peter out? We didn't need that buffer scene with the butler, you know, to like, get Harry to change his mind. It's just, it's not viable, it's not believable. The actor pretty much, like, didn't do anything great with it either. The guy who plays the butler, I imagine when he first like found out like that scene existed, like he probably like just laughed to himself of like how stupid it was, and just like, even though, you know, it's like his one moment in the trilogy where like he actually gets to like have the focus on him, like it's just so random and dumb. That's the other thing, like they didn't build this character up in the first two movies. Yeah, he's on camera in the first two movies, he has a couple pieces of dialogue in the first two movies, but they didn't build the character to a point of, you know, believability to place him in that situation, to have such a like turning point moment for one of the lead characters. So that was kind of stupid. Topher Grace as Venom, even though the origin of him getting the Venom suit was actually like very accurate to the source material of the original Venom, of like Venom going to the church, asking God to kill Peter Parker. Peter Parker takes off the black suit, and Eddie Brock gets the Venom symbiote. That's like pretty much that's pretty much exactly how the Venom origin went. So much like the wrestling scene with the carjacker in Spider-Man 1, they actually nailed one of the origins almost like piece for piece on how it should be. But my question is like, when Eddie Brock gets the Venom symbiote, Peter Parker's like knocked out from like the struggle of fucking taking this thing off. So like, why didn't Venom, like, instead of doing the stupid like Topher Grace going like, and you know, like that stupid smile he does when he gets the Venom symbiote and then jumping at the camera for a jump scare, why didn't Venom look up and be like, yeah, the guy I want to kill is just like laying fucking unconscious up there, so I'm gonna go fucking kill him. So like they didn't really think that one out. The ending, like the very ending of Peter entering, oh, before we get to that, Harry's death is stupid as hell and weak as hell. Um, so Harry gets stabbed by the glider, much like Norman did. So in that sense, they're kind of going for like a poetic end of like Harry died the same way as his father did, but Harry is like conscious and like he's like slowly dying. And then it's like the three of them, Mary Jane, Peter, and Harry, like have this really awkward moment where like all three of them are waiting for him to die. And it's like the movie is like really shoving it in our face, like Harry's going to die. It's like he's fucking young as fuck. Like, why is he just accepting that he's dying? Why isn't he fucking fighting to stay alive? Like, why isn't he doing everything in his power to stay alert, to fucking get help and like get fucking blood pumped into his body? Because like I assume that's what he died from, is loss of blood, even though you don't see any blood. That kind of wound, like he's probably bleeding internally and he's probably like losing blood. But of all the shit that happens to Harry in this movie, like that being the thing that kills him is a little bit unbelievable in itself. But it doesn't make sense that Harry just accepts his death the way it does. He's too young and in too good of like health to accept that. He should be struggling with the idea of death. I'm not saying like him dying necessarily was the wrong call, but like how they handled it was just really on the nose and really stupid. Like reality, Harry should have been fucking like struggling that he's dying, not just sitting there and accepting it like that way. The very, very end, when Peter walks into MJ's like restaurant and she's singing on stage, there's that really stupid moment where Mary Jane sees him and she like stops, and it's like, okay, like it's not it's not like this is the first time you're seeing him in like a year. Like you literally just saw him fucking, he literally just saved your life. You literally saw him at fucking Harry's funeral. Like there's no reason for you to have that shocked look on your face that Peter is there. So that was dumb. It's also dumb that like she chose to get off stage and like they chose to have them hug as the end of the movie, because you know, it's just on the nose garbage that like this trilogy like does. It's really on the nose. Nothing is subtle. Nothing is like left for the audience to like interpret on their own. Like even when Venom, like when Peter realizes Venom is fucked up by like sound vibrations, they had to do that stupid flashback cut to like Venom hitting the bell, and it's like they treat these movies treat their audience like they're stupid. And anybody who wants to get into screenwriting, specifically screenwriting, and possibly even directing as well, should honestly watch these movies to learn from all the mistakes that they do and how they treat their audience like they're stupid. Because God, these movies are written terribly. Spider-Man 2 is okay, but like, God, Spider-Man 1 and Spider-Man 3 are so fucking bad. Like, holy shit. Anyways, they had a chance to do something very like subtle in itself of like, because Mary Jane literally says in that scene of them like sitting on the web at the beginning of the movie where she says, I would like to spend the rest of my life singing with you watching front row. So at the very end, after all the shit that's happened, why didn't Peter walk into the restaurant? Mary Jane's singing, she sees him, she continues to sing, he pulls up a chair, and he sits front row watching her sing. And then they could even show like the rest of the restaurant where it's like everybody else is eating or dancing, and he's literally the only one watching. Because, you know, that's been her problem, is that like he hasn't really been paying attention to her. Like that's what her issues with him has been, and that it's always been about him, it's always about Spider-Man, and she didn't even have the courage to tell him she got fired. So why, like, if he showed up to watch her sing, and he's literally the only person there to watch her sing, I think that would have been a really special moment, actually, and it would have been a really powerful ending to, she keeps singing, she sees him, but she keeps singing. The rest of the restaurant isn't paying attention, but Peter is sitting there, front row, watching her sing, cut to black, cut to credits. That would have been a very, very powerful ending, and it would have accomplished two things. It would have accomplished that, you know, Peter and MJ are still in love, but it also would have accomplished that Peter, like, it would have completed the arc of this movie of, like, Peter's realized, like, he needs to be more selfless. Like, he needs to be less selfish and more selfless. And it's like, the way the ending comes off now, like, I don't think Mary Jane, the way she's been in this movie, would accept, like, what happened at the restaurant at the end of this movie as good enough. Like, because it's almost like him getting that hug from her is all about making him feel better. Whereas opposed to, which doesn't really make the arc make sense. Whereas opposed to if he pulled a chair up to watch her, then it's like the arc has, like, he's completed the arc of, like, it's not no longer about making him feel better, it's about making her feel better, and thus he's now putting his wife ahead of himself, which is like what Aunt May keeps telling him to do. It would have been such a more powerful ending, but they just didn't take the time to think of these things. Like I said with the first movie, like, there's just so many little things they didn't take the time to consider, and they really didn't take the time to consider it in this movie. There's a good movie in there, in the sense of, like, there were things that worked that could have been a really good movie, and what it comes down to, all of the stupid shit of Spider-Man 3, and, like, Spider-Man 3, to fix it, needs a complete rewrite. There's no way to make, like, the movie as it stands now. There's no way to make a good movie out of that mess. But there's ideas planted in there that if you rewrote the entire script to focus on certain ideas, there is a good movie in there. And what I think it comes down to is Peter being the bad guy. Like, really, I think if they made a whole movie with the concept of Peter is the bad guy, he gets this fucking alien symbiote, he starts becoming Black Suit Spider-Man, but Peter Parker becomes, like, the bad guy. He himself ruins everybody's lives around him. It would have given him, I think you focus on that, and you really focus in on, like, Peter being the bad guy instead of, like, the way they this movie comes across is, it's like they wanted Peter to do scummy things, but they never wanted us to view him as the bad guy, and they never wanted us to view him as, like, the guy that needs to change, even though that's really the only arc that he has in this movie, is that he's a piece of shit that needs to change. But they basically blame it all on the symbiote, and outside of, like, when he's not wearing it, he's still a great guy. Like, they should have had him wear the symbiote through the whole fucking movie, and literally him being a piece of shit. Not like the high marks, I think were fine. Like him hitting Mary Jane and him like killing Harry or almost killing Harry, and killing Sandman and having Aunt May lose her faith in him. Those can be the three high points. You can have like everything else before those things be like all little assholey things that he does. Those can still be the three high points. They don't need to have 2 hours of, Tobey Maguire's Peter Parker being like a nut house. But, that's not really what they did. And, we can only speculate on what that movie could have been if like that was like their entire focus. But alas, the movie is what it is, and the movie just isn't good. And there are elements of the movie, like all the memes that came out of it are fucking hilarious. I think Sandman as a whole is a really, really cliched character. The whole like my daughter is sick thing. Not only does it not really make sense because she's been sick for like over 5 years, she should be dead. Especially with sick kids, like it's not unusual for adults who have cancer to like for some adults to live multiple years, but you don't really hear that with children as often. Usually they don't. Usually they either overcome the disease or they succumb to the disease. You don't really generally often hear of like young kids like that are supposed to be his daughter's age having cancer for multiple years like that. And if she did, then she's not dying. Like that's the point. So like his character doesn't really make sense, and it's also just really cliched, man. Like I wish they did something more creative with that character than. And the dialogue for everybody is just fucking awful in this movie. Just like it is in Spider-Man 1 has some really dreadful dialogue too, and Spider-Man 2 has some like, meh dialogue, but Spider-Man 3 it probably has the worst of all of them, to be completely honest. And like I said, I think this movie would need a complete rewrite, like a complete rewrite. But even with the movie they presented, there's like easily like 30-40 minutes that can be cut out of the movie. I honestly felt like Peter Parker's story arc didn't even really start till like an hour and a half into the movie, when he, like during that like montage shit of him having the black suit and then beating Mary Jane up and almost killing Harry. Like all that stuff starts happening really late into the movie. The movie is only 2 hours and 20 minutes, and like that stuff starts happening around the 90-minute mark. So it's like everything up to that point like was nothing. Like they could have literally been cut, because like Peter Parker's the main character. His arc is supposed to be the most important arc. And I feel like his arc didn't even start until like 90 minutes into the movie. That's a massive problem. But it is what it is. Spider-Man 3 is the worst Spider-Man movie ever made. It's one of the worst movies ever made, period. Sam Raimi's heart wasn't in it. I understand that, but that's not an excuse when you're getting paid the type of money he was getting paid, and also just the opportunity to make a movie of that kind of scale. It's a slap into the face of not only the audiences, but a slap into the face of all the people in the film industry that would have loved that opportunity. And he wrote, or was part of the writing team. It was him and two others that wrote the screenplay. He wrote a terrible script, and he directed a movie that his heart wasn't in making. His heart wasn't into it at that point. The reality is he should have passed it off to somebody else. And if Sony wasn't willing to allow the movie to be passed off onto somebody else, he should have made a better movie, period. And like I said, I can't completely take the blame off him. Like, I understand he didn't want to do Venom. I understand that, his heart wasn't really in it once, he got the word that, like, he had to do Venom. But, dude, Venom's an awesome character. And if Sony was like, whatever you do with Spider-Man 3, Venom needs to be in it, like, it seems like the most obvious thing is that they wanted to do Harry as the main villain, but they essentially like took whatever script they had and like basically changed it so Harry's a villain at the start and then a villain for like a couple scenes, and then they shoehorned Eddie Brock into it. So like I don't think they really, whatever script they were planning on doing, I don't think they altered all that much, and that's probably why the script comes off as a jumbled mess. But based on that theory of mine, I don't think the movie that he wanted to make would have been all that much better anyways, to be completely honest. And what that tells me is that it was probably time to move on from Sam Raimi, and that's fine. Like, you can do two awesome movies in a series and move on. Like that, there's nothing wrong with that. Star Trek, Nicholas Meyer did the best Star Trek movie, Wrath of Khan. He didn't direct another movie until the end of the series. There was 3 movies that he did, Wrath of Khan, and then there were 3 other movies that took place before he got another shot at directing, and Wrath of Khan is by far the best Star Trek movie. So for anybody who's like, oh, it would have been impossible for them to do Spider-Man 3 without Sam Raimi, no, it wouldn't have been. George Lucas didn't direct The Empire Strikes Back. So like there's literally, there would have been nothing wrong with Sam Raimi being like, I'm not the right guy for this. You should hire, a new director. That director should pick a writing team that they would trust, and you'll get your Spider-Man 3 with Venom. And honestly, it probably would have been for the better, because that was pretty awful. That being said, I want to wrap this up. This video is going to take fucking forever for my computer to process and then to upload to YouTube. So I gave Spider-Man 1 a 4 out of 10. I gave Spider-Man 2 an 8.5 out of 10, which shows the quality gap between those 2 movies. Spider-Man 3, realistically, I'm going to give it a 2 out of 10. I can't go higher than that. At very highest, I would go 2.5 out of 10. So if we say 2.5 out of 10, 2.5 plus 8.5 is 11, plus 4 is 15. 15 out of 30 equals out to being 5 out of 10 for the trilogy. And most of that 5 going to Spider-Man 2. 5 out of 10 is technically a passing grade, but all that passing grade goes to Spider-Man 2, because Spider-Man 1 is a bad movie, Spider-Man 3 is a terrible movie. So there are my reviews for all 3 Spider-Mans, and between these videos I probably talked almost 4.5 hours about the Sam Raimi trilogy. So the movies came out when I was 11. I am turning 31, so these movies have been with me for 20 years now, and I don't hate them. I just think that there are better movies out there, and there are better Spider-Man movies out there. I think there are better comic book movies out there, and I think there are better Spider-Man movies out there. Spider-Man 2 is a kick-ass movie. Tobey Maguire, I think, did his best with the role. Ultimately, though, the reality is that they needed to make a change. If Spider-Man 3 was at the level of quality that Spider-Man 2 was, we would have never gotten Andrew Garfield, and we most likely would have never gotten Tom Holland either. So you can look at it a couple of ways, that Spider-Man 3 being as bad as it was led to, us getting Garfield, and then eventually led to us getting Tom Holland. So in that sense, you could say it's a blessing that the movie is really bad. But if you were like a massive Tobey fan and he's the only one you ever wanted, then you can blame Spider-Man 3 for not being a Spider-Man 4, because if Spider-Man 3 was as good as Spider-Man 2 was, there would have been a Spider-Man 4. And if there was a Spider-Man 4, Andrew Garfield certainly would have never played Spider-Man. And it's very unlikely Tom Holland ever would have too, because Spider-Man 4 would have came out probably around the time The Amazing Spider-Man came out, maybe a year or 2 before, but at that point, the MCU is already in the thick of things. If there's a Spider-Man 4 coming out in the 2010s, I don't see how you get Tom Holland, to be honest. So, take that however you want to take it, but that's maybe in the multiverse out there, in our multiverse, there is a Spider-Man 4, because maybe in that multiverse, in that universe, Spider-Man 3 was fucking kick-ass. And, you know, it's always nice to, like, think of those things, isn't it? Like, think of, like, what would have happened if Spider-Man 3 was good? I wonder what a good Spider-Man 3 would look like, or I wonder what a good Star Wars 7 would look like if George Lucas never sold it to Disney. That, though, is a rant for another video. It's time for me to end this. So, Spider-Man 3, I'm going to give it 2.5 out of 10. The trilogy adds up to 5 out of 10, which is barely a passing grade. And that passing grade goes mostly to Spider-Man 2, which honestly makes the trilogy overrated, because I think when people think of the trilogy, they mostly think of that movie, and I can't blame them because the other two aren't very good. That being said, I'm Jayvardy. This was Vlogmas for December 8th, 2021. I am out. Thank you for watching.